My name is Emma Zukow, and this is my place in Canadian history. My story starts with my grandmother, Ineke Komen, in Holland. She was born June 20th, 1948, 3 years after the Netherlands were liberated. She lived here with her brothers, Peter and Adrian, along with her mother and father. Holland at this point was in an extremely rough post-war state. The economy was struggling, many people were out of their jobs, and food was scarce. My family was living in Holland during World War II. This was hard as my grandmother's uncle was taken hostage in a German camp. He fortunately lived, but it changed him drastically. Unfortunately, my family had to declare bankruptcy, which meant they weren't allowed to stay in Holland until all their debt problems were solved. How did my family choose Canada out of all the countries to move to? My grandmother's father was walking through Holland and saw an ad that said growers wanted an orchard. The family were farmers and have always been involved in growing, so working on an orchard was something they would enjoy. My grandmother's father immediately went to inquire about the ad, which led to them being sponsored in Canada. Many of the Dutch at this time were sponsored by families in Canada through the Netherlands Farm Families Movement or the Netherlands-Canada Settlement Scheme. These programs allowed Dutch families to immigrate to Canada and live on a farm. These families would have to work on the farms until they were able to afford their own homes. When moving to Canada, my grandmother took the ship Groupe Beer, which was a 5 to 7 day boat trip. They arrived in Halifax on January 28, 1955, which was during the Pier 21 years in Halifax. My grandmother and her family were only able to take a limited amount of money from the country, but could take as many possessions with them as they liked. This was a government-enforced law which led to most immigrants investing their money into jewelry and household items to bring with them to their new homes. After arriving in Halifax, my grandmother and her family had to travel across Canada by train. It took them approximately 5 days to reach Kamloops, British Columbia. What challenges did my family face when they first came to Canada? The main struggle that my family faced was not being able to speak English. My grandmother was held back a grade when she first started school on February 14, 1955. This was due to her poor English skills. Not only was learning English a struggle, their food was also scarce at first. This was because they were responsible for growing all their own food. It was hard for the family adjusting to the new Canadian lifestyle, especially because my grandmother's father wanted to follow older traditional ways for the family. This would mean the boys would work as soon as they were of age and the girls would do all the housework. My grandmother also didn't celebrate Christmas like the rest of her new friends, as this wasn't celebrated back in Holland. They overcame these challenges by taking their citizenship classes and learning English through school and social events. My grandmother, through her years at school, was able to make many friends, including one close friend, Jen. They enjoyed swimming in the Skaha Lake in Penticton and spending time with one another. One day the two were hanging out when the Penticton siren went off. They found out that 2 planes had crashed into each other over the Skaha Lake. There wasn't a single survivor. This led to the two of them never swimming in the lake ever again. As my grandmother grew up, her summers always became the same, picking fruit and cleaning the house along with babysitting. The rest of the year was occupied by school. December 13, 1959, my grandmother's third brother was born, Stephen Komen. Eventually, as my grandmother grew older, she met my grandfather, Roy Prefontaine. They got married February 25, 1967, and continued to live in British Columbia. On August 6, 1968, they had their first kid, Angela Prefontaine, who is my aunt. 2 years later, on December 21st, my uncle Mike was born. On September 28, 1972, my mother, Lori Prefontaine, was born. The family grew up in Coquitlam, just outside of Vancouver. As everyone grew older, their living arrangements started to change. My father, Peter Zukow, was working in Vancouver, where he met my mother. While they were dating, my father's work forced him to move to Calgary. My mother decided that she would move with him, and they got engaged soonly after moving. They got married September 6, 1998 in Vancouver. The following year, my father's work required him to move once more. Him and my mother moved to Unionville, where I was born, February 23, 2001. Later that year, on September 11th, my mother heard news about the horrible event that had taken place in New York City. 2 planes had crashed into the World Trade Center towers, killing many. My mother, having me for not only a year, was scared that something could happen to our family here in Toronto. Eventually, this fear went away from all those in the community, including my mother and father. May 3rd, 2003, my sister, Hannah Zukow, was born. This was a big change for me as I was no longer an only child. In 2005, my family moved houses to where we live now. That year I also started kindergarten at Unionville Public School, where I graduated from on June 23, 2015. My sister and I are both athletic as she plays hockey and I figure skate and play volleyball. We both started skating at a young age because my mother was a figure skater. My family now is spread apart as we are the only ones in Ontario, but we love to travel often to see them. My grandmother and my Uncle Mike still live out in Vancouver, but sadly my grandfather has passed on. My mother's sister Angela now lives in Seattle with her husband Bruce and 2 sons, Colin and Malcolm. My family experienced hardship while in Holland and had to learn to adjust to Canadian life, but it led to my family being the way we are today. My story doesn't end here as it is still continuing as I grow older. This is my family's story and my place in Canadian history.